as Laurence Olivier would say, I just got up and did it. I mean, I'm not being clever here. It's just the part was so beautifully written that I didn't have to do anything except play the lines, you know. It was so sensitively written that it was a pleasure, and it was not a difficult role really. Not like Joan of Arc. I've played her 3 times, Joan of Arc. This is more tricky, huh?
The Bridge on the River Kwai won 7 Oscars, including one for Alec Guinness. Lawrence of Arabia won 7 Oscars and made international stars out of Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif. Dr. Zhivago won 5 Oscars and helped to skyrocket the career of Julie Christie. Looking at all these big successes, you certainly see no reason to say no when David Lean offers you a role in one of his pictures, especially when that role was practically written for you. But of course, by now, the critical destruction of Ryan's daughter has become almost legendary and essentially overshadows every other aspect of the movie, including its popularity with audiences, the difficult shooting conditions, and its leading lady Sarah Miles. While today often merely known as a rather eccentric performer who drinks her own urine, Sarah Miles is a classically trained actress who had a prominent start in movies at a young age and worked opposite some of the most respected performers of the 20th century, and whose overall life was exciting enough for her to write various biographies about it. And even if you're not too interested in everything Sarah Miles, they are often outrageously funny and entertaining looks back, even if probably not fully to be believed. But still, there is a story where Maggie Smith talks to Sarah Miles about her pubes, and I don't know what else you can want from a book.
How dare you speak to me in this manner?
Sarah Miles was named Sarah Elizabeth, after Sarah Bernhardt and Queen Elizabeth, so no pressure. However, she actually is related to the royal family by her mother's side. Her childhood was strongly shaped by a strong stutter, and she describes in her biography how "I could hardly talk for stammering, my stammer got worse, or my stammer unending." Additionally, she suffered from undiagnosed dyslexia. In those days, no one really knew what dyslexia was, so I went through a whole decade of school with the knowledge that I was just plain stupid, and then another decade of the same, and then almost another one after that. Everyone just thought I was stupid because I couldn't talk, couldn't read, couldn't write. Her condition was only diagnosed much later when her son suffered from the same problems. Through anguish, tears and hard work, I have conquered talking, writing and reading.
I was a left-hander. I caught a ball with my left hand, and my father said, "Pussycat's caught a ball in her left hand, come here." And everybody congratulated me, and I was swung around the garden because I had this left hand thing, you know, and I was cock of the walk. And then I went to school, and I was writing with my left hand, and the teacher comes up the aisle and says, No, Sarah, we write with the right hand.
Sarah Miles described how her childhood was marked by strong rebellion on her part, due to her stutter and her problems in school, which made her a laughingstock for other pupils. She remembered when the Queen Mother visited her school, she asked Sarah how she liked it. Her answer? "I hate it." During her youth, Sarah would be expelled from various schools due to her rebellious nature. Because of her problems with reading and writing, Sarah Miles mostly excelled in sports and also enjoyed appearing in school plays, but of course only non-speaking roles. While these small appearances already increased her interest in acting, it was her brother Christopher who had the biggest influence on her career path. As a teenager, he made films at home and needed the help of his sister to make animal noises or do little bits in front of the camera. Sarah herself remembers how these activities awakened a real passion. It wasn't a dream, nor was it an ambition. It was a fact. I was going to be a film star. Simple as that. Like Jane Alexander, Sarah Miles did not have to overcome any disapproval from her parents. On the contrary, her mother was very keen on her daughter becoming an actress, pushing her to audition at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts at the age of 15.
Well, my mother saw me in a play, and I had this severe stammer as a child. And when I was performing, the stammer went away, so she thought that this was obviously where my future lay, so she thrust me into RADA.
Sarah herself felt that she completely blew her audition, but the Academy clearly saw something in her and accepted her application.
I was so absolutely terrified, because you go on the stage, you know, and there's nobody, you can't see anything. absolutely black. What are you going to be doing for us today, says a voice. And I said, I'm going to be doing a little bit from The Ideal Husband and then a little bit from Romeo and Juliet. So I'll do Ideal Husband first. And I said, I need 2 more chairs, please. I said, what? 2 more chairs, please, for my... Oh, all right, 2 more chairs. So there's a terrible puffle and puffle while they find 2 more chairs to come on stage. So the chairs finally came on stage. And I said, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I've caused anybody any bother over that. Thank you so much. And then I did my piece, and I didn't need any chairs at all, you see.
As always, her rebellious nature did not make life easy for her at the academy. She herself states that she was much more interested in the other students and life outside the academy than learning to act, and she was almost kicked out of the school for not attending her classes, but in the end, Sarah Miles even won a special award for her work. And her talents launched her career right after finishing the Royal Academy, and she would work with many giants of the British theatre scene during the next years, from Edith Evans to Margaret Rutherford and Maggie Smith to John Gielgud. And it also did not take long for her first movie role, which would change her life in more than one way. When Sarah Miles watched Wuthering Heights as a child, she fell madly in love with Laurence Olivier, even keeping his picture under her pillows. And this fascination, or rather obsession, would become reality when she auditioned for the role of a schoolgirl falling in love with her teacher in the new wave film Term of Trial. Sarah Miles remembered how she pushed herself at the front of the line of all other actresses waiting to audition, as she was in a hurry to make the curtain in her London play The Moon is Blue, and would meet Olivier for the first time. Silence. I just stood there, homing into his eyes. A timeless experience. Despite her fascination for Olivier, Sarah initially refused the offer to play the part, as she did not want to dye her hair, but when it was agreed that she could wear a wig, her movie debut was secured. Olivier, who, as Sarah recognized, was old enough to be her father, had just gotten married to Joan Plowright, and as Sarah Miles suspected, was also carrying on an affair with co-star Simone Signoret during the making of Term of Trial, who herself was in an extremely depressed mood due to the affair of her husband Yves Montand with Marilyn Monroe. Again, I recommend Sarah Miles' biography to get a better picture of everything going on during the making of the movie, but essentially, while shooting Term of Trial, Sarah Miles and Laurence Olivier started a love affair of their own that would last for many years. It was an affair she highly enjoyed, but was never truly sure of. I was the luckiest girl alive. Or was I?
If you got points for being a good mistress, I reckon I'm up there. The only person that knew was my mother, because she caught us together, so she knew. But apart from that, nobody did. But it did keep me at home all the time because I was waiting for that phone call.
Yeah.
And that can be quite lonely, really.
Professionally, Sarah Miles also saw her life changing drastically as Term of Trial turned the 18-year-old into a sudden movie star. She was praised for stealing the movie from her more experienced and celebrated co-stars. In fact, Laurence Olivier called her the greatest find of the decade and immediately considered one of Britain's major new actresses.
I wanted it to be with him. He seemed so unhappy, and I really did love him.
She herself, however, considered her success beginner's luck and attributed her great reviews to the fact that it was just fashionable to knock Olivier down.
They slaughtered Larry. Oh, he can't play an ordinary man. This great newcomer called Sarah Miles, watch out for her. She's something special. She wipes the floor with him. You know, go see the film again and watch Larry in Term of Trial. It's such cruelty. It's so incorrect.
Sarah Miles would then do various further movies, including The Servant with Dirk Bogarde, but she also limited her career in various ways. First, she was unwilling to work abroad as she did not want to leave her dog behind, stating any possibility of an international film career was knocked on the head thanks to the quarantine laws. Apparently, she also refused to test for Anne of the Thousand Days for the same reason. Second, Sarah Miles, like many of her co-nominees from 1970, was unwilling to play the publicity game for the sake of her career. I had no interest in the showbiz side of acting, just in the process itself. And third, Sarah Miles was never willing to buckle down in a fight with a director or a co-star, constantly pushing for her own interpretations of her roles, often aiming for a more humorous performance since she always preferred comedy to drama bringing her the old reputation of being difficult. She also remembers that Hal Prince offered her the role of Sally Bowles in his new Broadway show Cabaret, which she had to decline due to a small problem. I went to quite a few singing teachers who all said in some polite fashion to pack it in. Sarah's most well-known movie from the 60s is definitely Blow Up by Michelangelo Antonioni, with whom she clashed very often during shooting due to the lack of a script and lack of a clear guidance just what her character was supposed to feel, or even who the man was she was doing a love scene with. For some reason, the film became the epitome of the swinging 60s. I believe I lack sufficient intellect to see what Antonioni was really trying to say. Blow Up for me was a cluster of clichés, bundled up in fashionable emperor's new clothes. However, the role further established her reputation as one of Britain's most relevant young actresses, together with Vanessa Redgrave, Julie Christie and Susanna York. But her career would come to a halt when she met playwright Robert Bald at a party hosted by Leslie Caron and Warren Beatty. Bald was well known for his work with David Lean on Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, and his play A Man for All Seasons. The meeting was maybe not love at first sight. She asked him why he had rolled up his sleeves, to which he gave the annoyed answer, "Because I'm hot." But it did not take long for them to become a couple, and when Sarah got pregnant, they eventually married in 1967. Like Carrie Snodgrass, Sarah Miles would then drop out of the business to focus on her private life for a couple of years. But just as it was the relationship to her husband that caused her to quit acting, it was also due to him that she would return again. At the end of the 60s, Sarah Miles accompanied her husband to India, where they would accidentally meet director David Lean. He and Robert Bald hadn't met for a couple of years after their plans to work together on a project about Gandhi fell apart after Dr. Zhivago. Lean himself was also more focused on his private life during this time, carrying out a relationship with 20-year-old Sandra Hotz. Lean was 57, while also still married to his wife Leela, who suffered from severe depression. Lean and Hotz would eventually marry in 1981 after Leela's death. During the meeting, Lean and Bald again discussed the possibility for a new project together. Oh, and Sarah Miles would also learn that David Lean had initially wanted her for a part in Dr. Zhivago, but Bald had opposed the idea as he considered Miles, whom he had not met by this point, to be a quote, North Country slut who didn't have the class for the role that would ultimately be played by Geraldine Chaplin. I cannot really imagine what that conversation must have been like, but Sarah Miles apparently took this information with good humor. And Robert Bald clearly aimed to make it up to his wife when, back home in London, he wrote the first draft of a screenplay for a movie version of Madame Bovary, telling her, "You're a great actress. You deserve a great part."
Actually, he was writing Madame Bovary. When he first met me, he thought I was Madame Bovary. Now, you can take that either way. I take it as quite an insult. She was rather a naughty woman. But anyway, he saw me as Madame Bovary, so he wrote a film script of Madame Bovary.
When Bald shared his script with David Lean, however, the director was not interested in a straight adaptation of the source material. But he would come up with a new idea, which was to draft a script based on Madame Bovary, but with a new original spin by setting the story in Ireland and using the Irish Revolutionary period as a background for the love triangle. Sarah Miles, however, simply said, Madame Bovary turned into Ryan's daughter. Those who are familiar with both will know that they are one and the same.
And I refused to look at any of what they were doing, even though they were handing me pages. I said, no, I don't want to know, because I have a terrible sort of destructive quality, and I knew I'm terribly pessimistic, and I didn't think for a moment that it would happen, and happen for me. So I sort of blanked the whole thing off and just went on mucking out stables and things like that.
For David Lean, Ryan's daughter was also supposed to show his versatility as a director. Having been criticized for the epic scale of his past movies, which many reviewers often called excessive, he was aiming to return to his roots, so to speak, with a smaller love story in the tradition of Brief Encounter.
He began with a series of small but brilliant films. Brief Encounter, Great Expectations, Summertime. Then he enlarged his canvas.
Given the success of his previous movies, MGM was more than willing to give David Lean everything he wanted for his directing return, granting him the most lucrative contract in movie history up to that point, with $1 million salary and a percentage of the profits, and also did not complain when a complete and functional village was built in Ireland as one of the major shooting locations. MGM knew that David Lean's epics could be excessive, but they were always worth it. But even they were unprepared for how difficult and long-winded the making of the movie would turn out to be. First, casting the principal parts in Ryan's daughter was far more difficult than expected. Sarah Miles was the only cast member immediately hired for the movie, but she was extremely sensitive about the situation. For the entirety of filming, she felt extra pressure to constantly prove herself worthy of the role she simply got by being, as she called it, the writer's wife.
It's a nightmare situation to find yourself in. What happens if you're no good? And your husband's written it for you. Look a proper Charlie, don't you?
She initially demanded David Lean to audition every other actress suitable for the role and only give it to her if he was sure of it, but he rejected the idea. For the other major roles, Alec Guinness had turned down the role of the local priest, which would be played by Trevor Howard, while Paul Scofield had been the first choice for the part of Rosie Ryan's husband, which would go to Robert Mitchum. For the part of Rosie's lover, David Lean approached Marlon Brando, Richard Harris and Peter O'Toole, who all declined. David Lean was then watching The Looking Glass War to see if Anthony Hopkins would fit the part, but instead became fascinated with actor Christopher Jones. Jones had worked in a New York theater and had been shortly married to Lee Strasberg's daughter Susan, and was often compared to the likes of Marlon Brando or James Dean in his work. David Lean admitted that he had decided on casting Jones completely out of the blue and without knowing anything about him, stating that he had an extraordinary screen personality, but during the shooting, he became more and more upset over Jones' approach to his role, his constant refusals to do what Lean asked of him, and quite simply for lacking any real acting talent, and Sarah Miles remembered that Lean often felt that Jones would ruin the picture.
You know, the English are crazy. I went for a walk there once in the rain, and I saw this little old man drawing on the pavement with chalk. And as fast as he drew, the rain kept washing it all away.
And David didn't check to find out the truth, which was he was dubbed in this movie playing a Pole, and David thought he did a brilliant job of the Polish accent, but he was dubbed, he found out later, and Christopher could not do an English accent at all. In fact, he could do very little. Anyway, the point being that it was a disaster, really. And he went to David Lean one day and said, could he bring over his Maserati Ferrari? And David said, yes, by all means. And his eyes lit up, David. And when Christopher Jones walked away, David turned to me and said, hopefully he'll kill himself in it.
After all roles had been cast, the entire crew would go to Ireland for shooting, where the perfectionism of David Lean would cause the 26-week schedule to more than double, as the Irish weather made it almost impossible to plan ahead or film any long scenes at a time. Sarah Miles recalled how she would shoot one half of a scene and then the other half weeks or even months later when the weather was right. And of course, the big storm sequence was also an enormously challenging scene that would take months to prepare and set up. Sarah Miles summed up the shooting as, "For 1 year, we were either waiting for the sun or the rain or whatever it was we needed. I thought I'd go bonkers before it was over." Adding to these technical problems were the difficulties within the cast and crew. Robert Mitchum and David Lean did not get along at all, and Sarah Miles remembered how a trailer was positioned between theirs, and she had to bring messages from one to the other when they would not speak. Mitchum also did not get along well with Sarah Miles, and she would later say that he was the one who released the story that she drinks her own urine to the press, but most of all, Christopher Jones would regularly hold up shooting, especially when he refused to shoot his love scene with Sarah Miles. Again, I suggest you read her biography for more details on the craziness of the shooting. I cannot say how true everything is, but the stories about her and David Lean secretly drugging Jones to play the love scene, or local residents constantly trying to start fights with Robert Mitchum, are ultimately far more entertaining than Ryan's daughter itself. Sarah Miles would later state that Jones' problems during the shooting came from his relationship with Olivia Hussey, as well as a shock over the murder of Sharon Tate. But despite all the problems that drove many of the cast and crew members almost crazy, the movie would eventually be finished and released in November 1970. And what often tends to be forgotten, it was, despite the high budget, still a financial hit and one of the 10 most successful movies of the year. And this was quite expected after the box office success of Lean's previous movies, especially Dr. Zhivago, which is still one of the 10 most successful movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. Critically, however, things look different. Again, to a certain degree, this was also expected. David Lean knew that his work was divisive. Dr. Zhivago had received quite a share of negative reviews as well. But the critical reactions, or rather hostility, given to Ryan's daughter, caught everyone involved with the movie completely off guard. It was clear that David Lean might have tried to return to the intimacy of his earlier movies with a small, unspectacular story, but he had been unable to limit the grandness of his direction accordingly, basically over-directing his own intentions. Of course, I don't want to focus only on the negatives here, because Ryan's daughter did get positive notes as well. But the dismissive voices were so strong and so unexpected that they dominated over every other reception the movie received. Sarah Miles remembered reactions as ferocious, and that critics fell upon Ryan's daughter with bloodthirsty relish, using butcher's knives to mutilate our 3 years of toil, sweat and strain. Unsurprisingly, most of the negative reviews focused on the scale of the movie, saying that with more than 3 hours runtime, it was a scale far too big for such a small story, and called Ryan's daughter an inflated B-picture. Roger Ebert stated that a simple love triangle on the southwest coast of Ireland simply can't bear the weight of Lean's overachieving. And Pauline Kael's review essentially summed it all up with, David Lean probably enjoys working his characteristic, gentleman technician's tastefully colossal style. Humorlessly meticulous, his pieces have no driving emotional energy, no passionate vision to conceal the heavy labor. Everything is posing for a photograph. The emptiness of Ryan's daughter shows in every frame.
But what they weren't looking at was the timelessness of that particular brilliant idea of David's and Robert's, which was to get a small story and make it huge canvas, and it will be timeless through history.
The people behind Ryan's daughter tried to come up with different reasons for the critical dislike, from a general sense of jealousy for David Lean's successes, to the fact that, during a time when the British film industry lacked money, Lean was given so much of it, or that his perfect visual style began to bore reviewers who had seen it all before, to the fact that, with the beginning of the 70s, the romantic angle of Ryan's daughter was just a relic from another time. The year saw contemporary stories like Love Story or Diary of a Mad Housewife, or movies set in the past like Women in Love or The Great White Hope, but at least with a modern message. Sarah Miles thought the movie was unfashionably romantic, and the idea of a woman cheating on a husband not controversial anymore. However, she called it the best movie she had ever been in, and David Lean one of the few authentic geniuses left in the world.
They were very cruel, you know, very cruel. Mitchum was pissed on, Robert, David. We all got it. We all got a very bad press. I don't know what it was about, but it was vicious.
It was just one too many for the critics. They just said, we're going to pull them down now. Yes. It's their turn. Yeah. And what's more, he's got his bleeding wife in it. So let's kill this one.
Yes.
The critical dislike of Ryan's daughter then reached a legendary peak when David Lean was invited to an off-the-record meeting at the National Society of Film Critics, where he sat at a table in what he remembers as a half-lit room with 10 to 12 critics who, in Lean's words, started grilling me in the most unfriendly fashion. One of the most leading questions was, can you please explain how the man who directed Brief Encounter can have directed this load of shit you call Ryan's daughter? Lean called it the most horrible experience I have ever had. Pauline Kael, who led the meeting, later said, I pretty much lost control, caught between a director I revered and colleagues for whom I had more respect than I do now. Lean did not counterattack. Instead, he went into a shell. At some point he said, I don't understand all this. Why are you doing this to me?
And they just took me to bits. And in the end, I remember saying, I don't think you ladies and gentlemen will be satisfied until I do a film in 16mm in black and white. And Pauline Kael said, no, you can have colour.
David Lean, a man who could barely handle any criticism at all, would feel the shame of the reactions to Ryan's Daughter for many years, not making a movie again until A Passage to India in 1984 and focusing on his private life instead.
You begin to think that maybe they're right. And I thought, why on earth am I making films? I don't have to. And I didn't for a bit. It shakes one's confidence, terribly. I find it very difficult directing movies. And one's awfully easily shaken,
Considering the reviews, it is not surprising that the movie only received a handful of Oscar nominations in the end, including for Sarah Miles as Best Actress. Most of the actors were able to escape the harsh reviews, but also their notes were often mixed. Even the performance by Oscar winner John Mills was described as an absurdity in some reviews. Sarah Miles herself was mostly called impressive, sensitive and charming, with a gentle vulnerability, but some reviewers also mentioned her failed attempts to be either blithe or brittle. Out of the entire cast, Trevor Howard was probably the performer who got the most praise in the end, and Sarah Miles herself also thought that he gave the best performance of the movie.
He's a very special man, and I believe his performance way outshines John Mills here.
Yeah.
I think John Mills is very over the top, and I think that Trevor is very subtle, and I think it's a beautiful performance.
And what do I think of Sarah's performance? First of all, it's probably necessary to address Ryan's Daughter as a whole, as many of the movie's problems also affect Sarah Miles' performance. On the one hand, yes, I can understand a lot of the criticism that was thrown at this movie. This is an extremely simple story, blown up unnecessarily and without any substance to back it up. If the screenplay had caught up with this majestic style and given the whole plot and the characters more complexity, this could have been okay, but this unfortunately never happened, and most of the characters remained extremely two-dimensional and never benefited from the vast structure of the plot. And the love triangle is honestly all there is, because the screenplay's attempts to add a political background to the story never works, mainly because the villagers in Ryan's Daughter are essentially this.
Justice like angry mob justice.
But in the defense of Ryan's Daughter, I also have to say, personally, I am a big fan of long epics, and I probably enjoy this movie more than most people, even if I can see its flaws. However, one thing I just want to point out is that you will be hard pressed to find a more beautiful looking movie. Yes, it's too much style over substance, but when you get images like this, I just cannot be mad. The whole thing often looks like a painting I could look at all day. But let's get to Sarah Miles now. The reason I brought up the flaws of the movie and the script is that they affect her work strongly too. Because at the end of the day, despite being the lead of a movie with more than 3 hours runtime, Sarah Miles essentially gets to be in love with one man, then be disappointed, fall in love with another man, get into some trouble, and return to her husband. I mean, this can be a complex theme, even in a David Lean movie. But in Ryan's Daughter, it unfortunately feels shockingly empty, as the movie never allows Sarah Miles to create any complexities. Considering that the part was written by her husband, you might expect it to be some kind of big showy role to show off her skills, and maybe that's what Robert Bolt had in mind, but in the finished story, it's a thin and two-dimensional character that barely goes beyond the surface.
What more are you wanting now?
I don't know that either.
That's a lie.
It's not. How can I know? I don't even know what more there is.
The main problem with Sarah Miles' performance is that it consists only of moments. We see she is happy, we see she is let's say curious, we see she is disappointed, we see she is unhappy. But these moments are never connected. Despite the long runtime of the movie, character developments happen almost from one moment to the next, without any clear indication or reasons. At the end of the day, Sarah Miles is dressed up, but has nowhere to go. At this point, the movie has been going on for almost 60 minutes, and it's almost impossible to say what has really happened with her character so far, or what she really had to do as an actress.
I can't believe you're here.
Well, I am.
Well, now.
And on top of that, her performance also feels too single-minded in many moments. She never gives the impression of having lived in this village her entire life, the people around her appear to be total strangers to her, and their actions always a shock. I get that this is most likely done to show her isolation from everyone else, but again, it doesn't help to make a convincing characterization. Even in moments like this, her performance lacks every bit of scope for anything happening around her. However, yes, there is an however, even if Sarah Miles' performance consists only of moments, I cannot deny that these moments are beautifully done. She has a very expressive face that, even if the movie keeps quiet about her motives, tells the viewers everything they need to know. I actually often feel this would have made a great performance in a silent picture, especially since the limits of Rosie's character would also have worked much better there.
You'd never be unfaithful to me, would you?
She manages to insert small moments of clarity in some scenes, such as talking about her upcoming wedding with Trevor Howard's priest, or leaving an intriguing vagueness in her goodbye to her father.
I'll write you.
Oh, and I'll write to you.
Well, maybe.
No, I swear to God, Rose, I will write every...
All right, Dad. We'll both write regular.
Sarah Miles can be completely engaging, even when her character isn't, and you get a sense of honesty in her portrayal, her curiosity, her sudden feelings of dissatisfaction, her passion for Christopher Jones' soldier, and finally the realization of her love for her husband, without truly needing her to add any words to these emotions. And while I would not say that she carries the movie, she is a point of reference and as such always able to make Rosie's story engaging without giving the audience the need to condemn her actions.
I think she's an average girl in that she wants more than she has, and what she has she can't really accept as what it is and wants something extra. It's about dreams and fantasies and realizing to be happy with what you've got, that terrible tune of whatever that song is, you know. And she goes through a lot. She's a very courageous girl in that she gets something else which she shouldn't get, and through doing this ruins everything.
It is an overall perplexing performance, touching and sincere, but unable to fill the emptiness of the character with more meaning or complexity. And like the movie itself, maybe never truly epic, but beautiful to look at. While Sarah Miles was working on Ryan's daughter, her husband was already working on a new project for her. A play about Mary of Scotland called Vivat Vivat Regina. Sarah Miles was, of course, thankful and would play Mary on the stage, but she privately considered the part unplayable and thought that Queen Elizabeth, who was portrayed by Eileen Atkins, a far better role. A sentiment that, for example, Peter O'Toole agreed on when he told Sarah Miles after the premiere that she had grounds for divorce. Still, when Sarah Miles appeared at the Oscars, she wore one of her Mary Queen of Scots outfits. Certainly fitting, considering that she lost the award to an actress already known for playing Queen Elizabeth. Like her co-nominees, Sarah Miles was pretty sure that Glenda Jackson would win the award. I spent an hour practicing my losing well smile, convinced that Glenda was simultaneously practicing her thank you speech. Later she said that many people in England congratulated her on her Oscar win because of the pictures of her with the Oscar she accepted for Ryan's daughter's cinematographer Freddie Young, and stopped correcting them at some point. But Sarah Miles did have a memorable moment at the Oscars when she presented an award together with George Segal. She was not happy about a joke she had to make about her husband keeping his Oscars in the toilet, and therefore decided to avoid a situation like this.
Sorry, a bit closer, it's my eyes. Very happy to be here. But I'm very happy to be giving an award to a writer.
Right. Listen, you've not only been nominated for your performance in Ryan's Daughter, but I understand you already have a couple of Oscars in your home in London.
Yes. Unfortunately, they belong to my husband, Robert Bolt. Thank you.
What did he write, Sarah?
Oh, yes, he wrote... He wrote Dr. Zhivago,
Right,
A Man
right.
for All Seasons,
Right.
Rosie Ryan. Oh, no.
I'm going to start with the nominations now, Sarah.
Later, Sarah Miles would eventually drop out of her husband's play and was also not involved in the 1971 movie Mary, Queen of Scots, which starred Vanessa Redgrave as Mary and that actress who had beaten her at the Oscars. Mary, Queen of Scots was not based on Robert Bolt's play, rather both his play and the movie were loosely based on a play by Friedrich Schiller. Sarah Miles called the film instantly forgettable. The remainder of Sarah Miles' career was not truly noteworthy professionally, but marked by personal scandal. While she was in the US for the Academy Awards, she met David Whiting, a correspondent from Time magazine with whom she had a short affair and who would eventually become her personal manager. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Whiting basically became obsessed with her, but also physically violent. While Sarah was shooting The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing with Burt Reynolds in 1973, Whiting again assaulted her in her hotel room, where he was later found dead. His death was eventually ruled as an accidental drug overdose, but rumors that Sarah Miles might have been involved somehow persisted and essentially greylisted her. The pressure of the scandal would also lead to a divorce from her husband Robert Bolt, but the two would remarry 7 years later after he suffered from a heart attack and a stroke. Moving forward, Sarah Miles would also focus more strongly on writing instead of acting.
Why writing after all these years of acting?
Well, I really always wanted to do something else. I wasn't quite sure what it was that was deep in me that needed accessing. Something dormant lay there, and my schooling was a tragedy because I was severely dyslexic in a time when there was no such word as dyslexia.
During her time at the Royal Academy, Sarah Miles had made a dream list for herself that included goals like meeting Laurence Olivier or becoming a movie star. She later regretted that all her dreams had been linked to money, vanity, fame and ego, and after Ryan's Daughter wondered, where in God's name was I to go from here, having basically achieved everything she ever wanted by 1970. While it is understandable that reaching her goals so quickly left her feeling empty, her professional and personal achievements are still remarkable. She was always able to live her life according to her own ideals, always coming out of moments of personal crisis with her spirits and her humor intact, and never letting the path of her existence be dictated by anyone but herself. And ultimately, leaving a maybe small, but still definite mark on movie history.